We hear the following questions a lot. Why is there no black player on the Argentina's national football team? Are there, or were there any black people in Argentina? The answer to the second question is yes. This video will answer the first question. So, what happened to the black population in Argentina? Based on data from 2009 to 2017, majority of Argentina's population is predominantly of European descent, largely Italian and Spanish, with approximately 97% of the population self-identifying as white or of European origin. A smaller portion identifies as indigenous or mestizo, mixed European and indigenous, and there is also a notable, though numerically small, population of Afro-Argentines. Has it always been like this? The first group of black people arrived in Argentina as enslaved Africans from Africa in 1535, 3 years after the foundation of Buenos Aires. Initially, though few in number, the enslaved population increased over the next 3 centuries as a result of trafficking in human cargo. By the time slavery was abolished in 1853, a black community flourished in Argentina, contributing their dance known as the candombe, music and literature to the country's vibrant culture. Following abolition, the black population continued to play an important role in Argentina's society, especially that of Buenos Aires. According to census information compiled in the years 1778 through 1836, it was revealed that black people accounted for a sizable minority of the city's population. Of the 24,363 individuals enumerated by the 1778 census, 7,235, or 37%, were blacks. However, the proportion they comprised of the city's population fluctuated over time. Although the number of black people in the city had increased by 1827, the proportion of the city's population that was black had declined. Of the city's 42,540 inhabitants, 8,321, or 20%, were black people. The city's black population continued to increase in number, as did the proportion it comprised of the overall population. According to the 1836 census, of the city's 63,035 inhabitants, 14,906, or 26%, were black people. The censuses taken in the years 1810 and 1827 denote the classification of people. There were whites, indigenous peoples, mestizos, or a mixture of white and indigenous people, pardos or mulattoes, morenos or blacks, and desconocidos or individuals who left the category of race blank, but denoted their legal status. By 1827, there were no black people in this category. The lack of black people in the desconocido category may have been because black people selected another category such as pardo, whose numbers increased from 1810 to 1827. So what really happened? First, we must look at the impact of diseases and low birth rates. Black people's infants indeed suffered from a high infant mortality rate. In 1828, the mortality rate for white infants under the age of 1 for every 1,000 births by sex was 246 males and 251 females. In contrast, the mortality rate among black infants was 442 males and 376 females. Black males suffered from a disproportionately higher infant mortality rate than their female counterparts or the city's white population. The difference in mortality rates within the black community itself may be attributed to living conditions. In general, diseases killed many in the black and white population. However, the conditions in which black people lived oftentimes increased the likelihood of their dying from diseases such as cholera and salmonella. Yellow fever was especially rampant during the 1870s, killing many people that could not escape areas that were infected, and the majority of its victims were blacks. War of Independence. Another reason for the decrease in the number of the black population has to do with the wars of independence and fighting within the country. Afro-Argentinos actively participated in Argentina's wars for territorial expansion and suffered from high casualty rates. One of the worst losses suffered by the country during the War for Independence occurred in 1815 at the Battle of Saipe, where 1,000 Afro-Argentinos were killed, captured or wounded, while 20 Spaniards were killed and 300 were wounded. The black mortality rate may have been high compared to that of the whites because the army placed black people in the front lines. Another example of the loss of life that occurred during the Wars of Independence were the military campaigns of General José San Martín. At least half of his army consisted of ex-enslaved people. When the army marched west to the Andes Mountains in Chile, and from there north to Peru and Ecuador in the hopes of liberating the countries from Spanish rule, only half of the 2,000 black soldiers in General San Martín's army made it to Chile. Racial reclassification. A new term of racial classification known as trigueño, meaning neither black nor white, came into use shortly after Argentina's declaration of independence in 1810. The term literally meant wheat-colored, from the Spanish word trigo for wheat. It was used to identify light-skinned black people and dark-skinned white people. In doing so, it helped to categorize social mobility. Light-skinned black people had a better chance of being accepted into the white middle class than their dark-skinned counterparts. However, the dark-skinned white people's chances of social mobility would be minimal compared to their white middle-class counterparts. According to historians, trigueño was applied to whites that had black or chestnut-colored hair, bronze or chestnut-colored skin, or those physically resembling black people. It was also used as a substitute for the word negro for black people in high respectable positions. The term trigueño was also typically applied to Sicilian immigrants, though it was not a term that they voluntarily accepted, as was the case with the black population. As the frequency of miscegenation increased, it also became harder to determine who was black. A new category of black came into existence known as white blacks, designating black people that had more white than black in their blood. Thus, a white slave was not uncommon in Argentina. Newspaper articles from the 19th century referred to some mulattoes as mulatto whites. One anecdote even referred to the white mulatto as being a rare beauty. Intellectuals' influence. Argentine leaders and intellectuals in the 19th centuries, especially during the generations of 1837 and 1880, made an effort to systematically erase black Argentine from the country's history, popular culture, and society in an effort to position the nation as a global power modeled after the US and Europe. During the 1700s, roughly a third of the population of Buenos Aires was composed of Afro-Argentines. Among the intellectuals of the 1880 generation, 3 stand out for their opinions about the black population. All 3 adhered to the teachings of social Darwinism. Thus, they argued that a whiter Argentina would be the best way to achieve a more civilized country. Domingo F. Sarmiento, who wrote Civilización y Barbarie, La vida de Juan Facundo Quiroga in 1845, retells the life of Juan Facundo Quiroga, a general during the years of Argentina's expansion. Sarmiento criticized Rosas's government as barbaric. According to Sarmiento, one potential solution to this problem was to encourage European immigration to whiten the population. He did not believe in the mixing of white and black people. Instead, he looked to the United States as a role model and strongly supported the idea of segregating the Native Americans and marginalizing the black people and prohibiting the 2 groups from participating genetically, socially, and politically. In doing so, white men would be able to retain political and social power. Unlike Sarmiento, Juan Bautista Alberdi believed that racial mixing was important because the genes of whites would dominate and were superior to the inferior genes of non-whites, which would help to breed out the bad genes. José Ingenieros, who wrote both Sociología Argentina in 1913 and La locura en la Argentina in 1937, was a strong believer in social Darwinism and was more extreme in his views than either Alberdi or Sarmiento. He believed that the fight for the second independence of Argentina, freeing the mind of the old ways, would be one of race before class, and institutional formation. By the end of the 19th century, the dreams of Sarmiento, Alberdi, and Ingenieros had been achieved. Between the years 1880 and 1900, almost 1 million European immigrants arrived in Argentina. By 1900, the country's dependence on black people for its labor force, army, and voting ballots had been replaced by European immigrants. Black people were left to compete with newly arrived immigrants for jobs they had previously held. Ingeniero's goal had been achieved. Between the years 1880 and 1900, almost 1 million European immigrants arrived in Argentina. Paraguayan War. Like the War of Independence, during the Paraguayan War of 1865, black Argentines were forced to enlist en masse to fight for the military. The conflict resulted in the deaths of thousands of black men, culminating in heavy gender imbalance in the Afro-Argentine population. As a result, we got more race mixing. Marriages between black women and white men were common. A sex ratio imbalance among the black population forced black women who wished to marry to seek out husbands among white immigrant men. This prompts one to ask, why would white men choose to marry black women? One reason was the lack of white women. Most immigrants that came to Argentina were men. In most cases, they were not looking to settle permanently, but to work and return home with the money they had saved. However, as more male immigrants came and settled in Buenos Aires, it became harder for them to marry a white woman. Consequently, many immigrants married black women. Although the magazine Caras y Caretas once stated that it bothered a black family to see their children marry a white person, there was never an indication of blacks having a problem with the intermarriage of black and white people. The cholera and the yellow fever epidemic. The cholera epidemic in 1860, followed by yellow fever in 1871, devastated the Afro-Argentine population due to the terrible conditions in which they were forced to live in because of systematic discrimination, with nearly non-existent access to proper sanitation or health care. Other black Argentines fled to Brazil and other nearby countries. Government policies. Domingo Faustino Sarmiento, president of Argentina from 1868 to 1874, viewed the mere existence of black Argentines as a threat to the advancement of the country, so he carried out a targeted covert genocide of people with African heritage. He implemented oppressive and deadly policies toward the black community. These policies forced people with African origin to live in slums. He also implemented a heavy recruitment of Afro-Argentines into the military, mass imprisonment for minor crimes, and mass executions. By the end of the 19th century, the Afro-Argentines were nearly wiped out. The government didn't even bother to recognize their existence by the end of the 1895 national census. After the black population was decimated, another wave of white immigrants from Europe began to flood the country in large part due to the 1853 construction. Argentines' leaders went about rewriting and whitewashing history. Original painting of Afro-Argentines dancing tango resolve with white European protagonists. In 2010, only 0.4% of the population identified as having Afro ancestry. In 1997, then-President Carlos Menem was asked if there were black people in Argentina. He responded, "No, Brazil has that problem." In the face of globalization and ever-growing rates of immigration across the globe, including significant increase of people with African descent heading to Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, it seems impossible for the country's racial diversity to remain stagnant. If you enjoy this video, please like, comment, and share. And do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more Black history.